let's give Miss Airisun Wonderli a wonderful welcome.
All right. As he said, everybody had lunch, so we want to make sure no one naps right now. So let's raise our hands and say, we're awake, we're awake, we're awake. Okay. Wonderful. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I see familiar faces and new faces, and I hope to meet the new faces today and tomorrow. I'm real excited to be able to share with you part of a chapter on Walter Russell's perception of children and the child portraits. As we saw, maybe many of you in the next room, there are many examples of those there. We probably will never find them all. But in the three children's books that I want to mention that John kind of reminded me a little bit ago, out here, I call it the trilogy of Walter Russell's children's books that he actually wrote and illustrated are out there. I do have a collection of those, first edition, and one of them I'm sharing with the museum. And probably be left to the museum years from now. So please, please, please look at those child portraits out there. I may be able to show you a few you haven't seen. I hope so. But I went through those three children's books and realized that I would not be able to show every page. If anyone has seen The Sea Children, which was brought up by Walter Russell in 1901, basically he did pen and ink on almost every page. So there's no way I could reproduce in my book every page of those pen and ink drawings. But I have reproduced for my book every slick, full page, painting or drawing, that Walter Russell did in the three children's books. Those will be a complete collection within my new book that I'm working on, about 100 pages into it. So I have no idea. Don't ask me how long it's going to take me to do it. So it really is a God job. When I can work on it, for sure. So today, you know, we're looking, and I love what Richard said last night, had a lot of intuition about when he shared with us that this is a living philosophy. And if we're going to bring our children into the future, we might want to live the philosophy and set an example. And how do we do that? We do it with our beliefs, our values, and our character. And so we're going to talk about that. Right down below there, there's beliefs, values, and character. How do we teach our children? Thank you, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. How do we listen to our children? That's a whole nother thing. And I'm going to share a little bit out of the Bending of the Twig. And one of the reasons I absolutely love these three children's books, I've written a children's book and illustrated it myself. I know how hard it is to do. But I will tell you, The Sea Children, I have never found another children's book like that book. Just the detail that he spent and the research that he did on underwater, and he basically consulted with biologists and scientists just to correctly be able to draw and paint, you know, the underworld of water and the oceans. And that, to me, is just a consummate master. Absolutely. So the second book is The Bending of the Twig. The third book was The Age of Innocence. So I kind of took this, you know, bird's eye view and said, oh my gosh. So with his first book, he went underwater. And so he saw children in the water. The second book, Bending of the Twig, he took them to the trees. And he compared them with, you know, a twig of a tree. In the third book, I think he just had them. The Age of Innocence. And so basically from 1901 to 1904, I think he was re-experiencing his own innocence through his children that he had at the turn of the century. Also at the turn of the century, we're going to look a little bit on the Ladies' Home Journal. We have, where's Sam? Sam Spiker? Did he leave for a minute and take a nap? He is in the back there. Sam Spiker has the whole collection of Ladies' Home Journal magazines. The first whole part, I do a history of Walter Russell, and then I go into the magazine illustrations. Before 1900, this was Walter's bread and butter. This is how he made a living in New York City, through magazine illustrations. I have at least found 70 illustrations the world has never seen. And these will be eventually in my book. They're in my book because of the second chapter. But it was like Christmas. So if you enjoy Christmas so many times of the year, it was like, oh my gosh, I found another one. You know, and realizing that not even anyone down here who has met Lao Russell are familiar with these magazine illustrations. And it's taken a lot of research. It's exciting work. It's not work to me. So sometimes it's hard just to get away from the computer after I get started. So if my phone's turned off, you know I'm working. Or I'm playing with the book. So what we want to see today is to feel the essence of Walter and Lao Russell also in the later years when she started writing with him, and their perception of children and how we bring them forward into the schools and a new perception of schools, really, essentially. And tomorrow, Elaine will be talking with us about the age of character and about children in the schools, and this is going to really lead up to her talk. So what we're going to do is we take a little journey. I'm inviting you on a little journey back into the past of Walter Russell and how he perceived children. And of course, his innocence came back when he had his own two girls. And so there were many, many drawings and paintings of his two girls in all these books, every one of them. And he writes about them within the book. And so I think he really formulated how he felt about children when he had his own children. So I'm going to read a little bit of The Bending of the Twig, which I'm really excited about. Walter, a lot of people who've read his later books, you know, really perceived him as a different kind of writer. You know, he wrote mostly about science, and I'm just enthralled with the art of Walter Russell. And so basically, I want to say that Walter is a poet. And I think by my reading part of The Bending of the Twig, you're going to realize that Walter Russell was a poet. The way he chose how to express himself early on, and children were the perfect topic. And so before the age of photography, which took over the magazines, you know, there were so many magazine illustrators in the last part of the 1800s. Basically, in 1900 was when, you know, around that year when he started drawing and painting children. By 1903, Ladies' Home Journal and many, 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 many people considered him the foremost painter of children in the United States, in the Americas. And so, how do we not know? How did I go through school and never discovered Walter Russell? Why isn't there art books about Walter Russell? When he passed away up at Swannanoa on the mountain in 1963, Walter Cronkite called him Leonardo da Vinci of our time. How can he be called that? And America doesn't know Walter Russell. You know, to me, this is a travesty. So I intend to correct that before I refold. And that every middle school, high school, and college, I'm intending, will have my new book in there. And that people... It is just so important. And I don't know how long it's going to be. I'm trying to get, you know, 4 illustrations to a page and, you know, trying to condense it down because otherwise I think it'd be a 1,000-page book or something. So... we'll see how visible they are. I hope they're really visible up here. Being able to scan them in. The University of Michigan, if you're interested in reading these 3 children's books, they have digitalized them. So what I found, though, is that you can read them, but I couldn't always pull off the illustrations themselves. And so some of them are pulled from that digitalization, and some of them I had to scan them in myself. And so, but I will tell you this, that you see all of the illustrations that he had in the trilogy of books, you will be able to see that they are in order from the beginning to the end of the book. So I have them going 4 to a page, left, right, and then down, left, right. And so this felt really important to me, to have a chronology of being able to show these illustrations. So I would like to share with you, in my idea, a part of the poetry of Walter Russell. Now, he kind of shares his ideas and his perception of children from these couple of readings. What rest and pleasure to step into the child world. The world of nature of which grown-ups know only the outside and love that, not knowing that their children can open up to them its heart, its soul. Think of the innocence and purity of a little mind that asked the flowers in all seriousness if they wished to send any message back to grown-up people by me when I became Papa again. And then listened for an answer and heard it, actually heard the flowers request that I should tell grown-up people to put flowers in water, always when they gathered them so they would not droop and die. And I promised, in all seriousness, I promised, forgetting almost that we were playing make-believe. And the questioning of little minds. Do rabbits have a heavenly father too, Papa? And why can't they climb trees to get away from naughty doggies as the squirrels do? Think of answering such questions intelligently and simply enough to satisfy the demands of childhood, and truthfully enough to encourage the reasoning and imaginative faculties. And one must be truthful always with a child, or trouble is inevitable. For the child will follow up a question with others until it has reached an intelligent and satisfactory conclusion, unless the reasoning process leads it so deep that the mind becomes tired and throws it off. And lastly, and then the stories, old ones and new ones, quoted ones and original ones, stories without end. We have an agreement with each other, and I find is of great help in developing her imagination. She is always to tell me a story in exchange for one of mine. No matter how brief or how irrational, it is her story, and it helps me to know her mind and to watch her development psychologically, and that helps a parent too. Helps keep alive the imaginative faculty which forever strives to release itself from adults in favor of practical and real things. And so to me, it's like there are individual stories in this book, The Bending of the Twig, and as I said, we're going to look at some of the illustrations with it. But he's already talking about how he perceives his own children and how he was able. We're going to look at one of the magazine articles I found was Walter Russell talking about, and wrote the article, in a magazine called Broadway Magazine. We're going to look at that. Of how he paints children, how he gets them to sit still, how he talks to them. You know, this was an amazing thing. You have to have a relationship and build a relationship with a child to be able to draw them, paint them, as much as he did for the many, many years that he did. So, we're going to go forward here. One of the things I did want to share, one of my favorite quotes, the foundation of the universe is love, balance, and unity. And how do we share that with our children? How do you share that idea? You know, one of the reasons I love this quote of Walter Russell's is that it seems really simple, but it's kind of like a classical story. Like if you keep looking for all the meanings that it has. The foundation of the universe is love, balance, and unity. This is what we have to have within ourselves before we can show it to our children. This is what we have to be able to share it with other people. How do we become unified with other people unless we have unification within ourselves? How do we have balance in our own life each day? you know. There's a great, I think he's great. He's a great doctor that lives in Canada right now, but he's from Hungary, Gabor Mate. And Gabor Mate, first of all, says that children absorb all the stress of their parents. And I remember I did that. You know, there's no doubt about that. So if you're stressed out, they're going to absorb everything. So how do you live your life in balance to prevent that? We know that stress is one of the major causes of all illness. And so basically, it's being able to change ourselves to reflect back to our children and guide our children. And so this is one of the reasons I love that quote. We're going to look. It's the cover of my new book. It will be the same size as the Swannanoa book. Just give you 8.5 by 11, which is just so easily more printable. This time, for the first time, this is my 4th book, I will probably look for a publisher. I think this is so marketable. So I wanted to show Walter in his diversity of mediums within the art world and within his own studio. And so to have a photo of the sculpture and the painting to me was so important. There we go. Broadway Magazine. Oh my goodness. So I want to share a little bit of that with you, because he shows really how he perceives children. When a little one is brought to me for a portrait, I seek to win its friendship with an ardor that might appear exaggerated or slightly amusing to the uninitiated. I chat to it, tell it stories, play with it, and in the midst of our frolics, I take mental notes. As far as possible, I make an effort to draw and paint from memory using the little sketches taken during our games. My idea is simply this: to become so familiar with my subject that when I begin the actual painting of the portrait, the child has so taken hold of my faculties that it stands before me with the vividness and clearness of life. All that I have to do is to paint what I see. You know, I really tried to find, if you see, well, where's that little? I just laid it down. So, right here. I tried to find another copy of this because it gets cut off down there, but in research could not find another copy. But it's legible enough just about everywhere. Hopefully legible enough in my book. But like I said, 4 to a page. Could probably make these a little bit bigger. A child has a curious way of taking knowledge of its own finished portrait and is intensely sensitive to a hair's breadth misinterpretation of its tiny self. I tremble and grow confused at the clear, luminous look of a little child upon my daring and stumbling efforts to reveal what it has permitted me to gaze upon. You know, just the respect. Feeling honored just to work with children, you know. Probably a 3 to 4 page article in a magazine. Didn't even know a magazine called Broadway Magazine even existed. He says, my calling came to me as a revelation. For years, I had made a specialty of marine work. After a child, I loved the ocean, but when I began sketching my own children, I discovered I had found my true vocation. All my previous work had been a sort of apprenticeship awaiting the sound of this, my hour of destiny. Not knowing what was in front of him for his own future. How he got into science in 1921. How he got into painting notable people, probably around 1918. Another great book, I know there's a copy of it here. Darren actually had a great experience with, I think, with being interviewed. The Hotel des Artistes, which was partially created by Walter Russell. There is a book that is called the Hotel des Artistes. There are 8 pages in there on Walter Russell. Really, really important book. They interviewed Darren for this, our archivist here, and beautiful, beautiful pages. He lived there until about, I believe, 1927. No, that would have been like 22 years he lived at the Hotel des Artistes with his family. These are the years that he had his own studio. He actually shared it with one of the other gentlemen in that building. And he would be painting all those years before he received his science in 1921. That was a little article on Who's Who in New York. Walter Russell was in there. Here's the first cover of the Ladies' Home Journal. We're going to get through these fairly quickly, but really important. He was so famous that they wanted to paint the 12 prettiest children in America. And basically the deal was that he would go be paid by the Ladies' Home Journal for years, 2 to 3 years, and basically get to travel around and collect all these photographs of children, and then eventually, paint what, he decided was the 12 prettiest children. Now, if you know Walter Russell, he's not going to use beauty alone. He's going to look for some kind of character within the child. He's going to look for something deeper. He's going to look with, what their interests were. And this is why he spent so much time with them before he would paint them. So we know there are probably many, many commissioned works that are out there. And so one of the things a friend of mine gave me an idea was to put a free press release in the New York Times we're looking for any portraits or any paintings that were done by Walter Russell. If we could receive those, a photograph of them in color, we could, credit each photo, whoever owns them. So I think it's going to be really important. This was how it was introduced into the magazine. Basically, so there were 18,000 photographs he had to go through. Can you imagine that? Oh my goodness. And then he had to pare them down and pare them down and pare them down. And that's why this was so important. So I just recently went back through, and they are digitalized. I got them offline, some of them, but I could not print them out. I'll have to work with Sam to get the double-page ads and descriptions and showing the children that came down to the last ones. Now this was another introduction in one of the magazines. Whoop. Quentin Roosevelt, youngest child of Teddy Roosevelt. This morning, research is endless. But that's part of what makes it so exciting. There was a documentary on TV about 2 years ago on Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm watching it, and all of a sudden they went upstairs into Sagamore Hill. Well, they lived their last years in that beautiful, beautiful home at Sagamore Hill. We're going to see some photos of Walter Russell playing with his children. Why was he really good friends with Teddy Roosevelt? If you look at Teddy, they had a lot of similarities. The only one difference that I realized that they had was that I think they had different views about war. And I think that Teddy Roosevelt, as you know, he was kind of, not that he was a warmonger, but that he believed in protecting the country. But he was a soldier, and he understood the military, that kind of aspect. But what's interesting is that it was this child who lost his life in World War I, and in the last year of Teddy Roosevelt's life, he grieved. He never was the same. And I think his ideas about war really, really shifted after he lost his youngest son. The similarities that Teddy and Walter had, they were both consummate horsemen, and so they would go riding together all the time. Walter got to know his children really well. These were children from his second wife. He had 6 children in all, but 5 from the second wife. And so he was really good friends with Quentin. These are some of the other articles. I think this thing is so sensitive that I don't even have to push it. I think I just touch it. So these are the 2 beginnings of the double page. Now these are not the ones that are going to be finally in my book because I'm going to need to actually digitalize the original ones from Sam's collection. But just to give you an idea and how they pared them down. So there were 4 issues that had the double pages in them. Yep, it is just touch sensitive. So these were the last 12, the prettiest children in America. We're going to see that some of these were actually reprinted in his children's books. And so I think this is just amazing. After he finished these portraits from the Ladies' Home Journal, they were given to the families. And so basically, I'm not even sure how we have copies of some of these. I think some in the other room are actually probably pencil sketches. And we really, really don't get to see what the finished product was. So at the beginning of every chapter, I'm going to have a Walter Russell quote, talking about something that has to do with that chapter. And this will not only help people realize what he knew, but how he showed what he knew. You know, with each production or each painting, each sculpture, whatever it is, whatever medium. He says, do you think that civilization advances because of things written in books? Not a bit of what is written in books ever got there until after the thought of it happened. And so then he's getting back into philosophy and psychology. The book is but a record of what has already happened. It is a means of thought transference only and not a creative process until you have made it so by transformation within you. This is so important that I'm not just showing, I don't want to just show, and I have been guided that I'm not to just show Walter Russell's art. I'm going to show the thought and the philosophy behind the art. And that's what's going to make it more important. That even through reading this book, your life can be changed, you know, or your art can be changed. Your character can be changed. So here we go. These are the 3, the trilogy. It's really important for me to get first editions of these 3 books. And they're out here. I want to urge everyone to go out there later to look at those for sure. Can't open them up, but I might let you open them up in my big bending of the twig, possibly. So then we get into the sea children. So I'm going to go through these a little more quickly. This shows you how he found, you know, the characters of the sea children. He found them through live children, and how each main character was. These are not all of them, but just the 2 up at the top. One, the boy Poulet was actually modeled after a girl, which I thought was rather interesting, and the other boy at the top was modeled after his daughter. So it's really interesting to see. Where are you? Now, I know Jeremy showed me the original of this Poulet. I know we have looked at it. It's really important to get all of the works that are in, can't say this enough, digitalized, to be fed to me, so that I can at least get everything that we have inside the museum into the book. And while we're doing that, I will still be researching and trying to find more artwork that is out there in private collections. The detail is just phenomenal. I mean, you know, only a man who has a relationship with children can draw or paint like this. It's just phenomenal. So these are like, sometimes on pages where there's a written word in the story, he'll have just maybe, one portrait of one of the children. You can almost look within and see the character of each child. I think these are so, so important. So then we get into the second book, The Bending of the Twig. Whoops, I didn't even hit it. Whoops. Okay, I went back. This is an article in current literature that was basically advertising the bending of the twig. And so these are things that you find when you're just, who would have thought 30 years ago the meaning of the word Google? I mean, who would have really thought what that meant? You could have said that to a child and made up a little song about it or something, but I'm telling you, Google is such an important word. Children now probably know what Google means, but I Googled and Googled again, trying to find these. I can't tell you the research it has taken. All right. Okay, so in The Bending of the Twig, this was just about also had pen and ink sketches or pencil sketches before he actually went to more detailed, what I would call a full slick page of a painting or a drawing. The upper left one was probably a portrait. We might even have a sketch of it in the next room, I think. I thought I had seen it. You realize the humanness of everyone. You hopefully have someone edit your book and edit your book and edit your book. But even Walter Russell can make mistakes. This little drawing right down here, that one is called out Helen. He repeated it in The Age of Innocence, the next book he wrote, and named it as another girl. I think it was Mary. Possibly a publisher mistake. So let's not maybe blame Walter Russell, but you catch that when you see the same thing over again. You're like, oh my gosh, and then you compare the two books and this is printed again and called a different name. So that was one of the interesting things I discovered. Probably it was Helen. This is the portrait of Quentin. So I was looking at that documentary on Teddy Roosevelt, and all of a sudden, the camera went up the stairs, and there was the original Walter Russell painting in that documentary. And all I could do was just stop it and basically take a picture of it, because I keep Googling, and if you look up Sagamore Hill, you would think that they would have shown some of the photographs from upstairs, but there aren't any. There are no pictures, would have been able to show his portrait of Teddy Roosevelt's wife. Where is it? It's at Sagamore Hill, I know. So, we take a trip there, take photos of it for the book. Whatever's going to be necessary, because to see a finished, full, oil color portrait is not the same as seeing it like this. It's going to be really different. So I would really love to do that. So in this book, we do have the first names of the children. We don't have last names. So trying to discover who they are is a whole different story. But just the various way that he painted, drew children. There's Helen and Louise quite a bit. This one up here in the right hand we had seen in the Broadway magazine. This one down below on the left is Quentin again. And we're going to see more of that in The Age of Innocence, because he dedicates The Age of Innocence to Teddy Roosevelt's children. His idea of an angel. Same girl down here at the bottom. This looks like a full portrait over here in the bottom right. Probably was in color. One of the things that he did in all three of these books is that many of them, they weren't in color, but he tinted them pink or green or blue. And so knowing what I had to go through when I did the Swannanoa book, it's a lot cheaper to print black and white. So instead of showing the tint, I converted them to black and white because it's going to be a lot cheaper to print the book that way. Another angel down here at the bottom. One upper left one is probably a full page, you know, a portrait of a child. And then we get to the age of innocence. One of the things I find really interesting, this is kind of how he introduced the age of innocence. The age of innocence, the golden age, the joyous age, the age of happy, happy childhood, which we all have lived, and alas, too many have forgotten. Oh, ye grown-ups, go back with me for one sweet hour of contemplation. Leave the noonday and the evening and go when joy and gladness sparkled on the values of the earth, waters of the earth. All right. Let me get a little in front of this for a moment. In paths of brilliant light which led to children's hearts and made them leap and bound with quickening touch till day had gone and night had wrapped its somber garment around the hearts of those who would forget the joy that had been theirs at dawn. There is youth in the reliving days when care and worry concern tops and kites instead of notes soon do. Let us live our childhood once again, visit that daisy field of those fair days, play in the old barn where we leaped from lofty beams, fish along the brookside, play on sandy beaches, and whatever else we did when we were little boys and girls. This was from his portrait of, I believe, Ethel and Archie. This is from The Age of Innocence. So he dedicates it to Teddy Roosevelt's children. And I don't know if anybody has seen these pictures. I was so excited when I found these. This is Walter Russell playing with Teddy Roosevelt's children on the sandy beaches, probably at Sagamore Hill. I mean, it just gives you an idea of how he romped with them and knew them well. Another Christmas day was when I found the little note written to Walter Russell from Quentin Roosevelt. And there it is.
Could you read it?
Yep. Dear Mr. Russell, thank you ever so much for the pictures you sent me. I like them very much. If I did not until before, because now I go to school in the morning and I can't quite see that. Say that again. And afternoons, and then I have also my French and music lessons. Mr. Curtis has sent us each a picture. How are Helen and Buzzy? Nickname for Louise, Buzzy, and the dogs, ducks, pigs, and horses. Your little friend, Quentin. So, you know, just finding something like that, it's just amazing. And so these were all labeled with first names. I would suggest that these top two, at least, are full portraits that he was commissioned to do. Some of them, this looks like a pencil drawing, the upper right one. A lot of the other ones were probably full portraits. I love the one of Donald. I think there's a pencil of Donald in the other room. This little girl, June Delight, was done 2 or 3 times in different ones. You can see the innocence. You can see the character, depending upon how old they are. This guy, James, is a little older. Marie up there, that's one of my favorite. There's that same drawing, and this is Mary. It was Helen in the other book, so I would guess it was probably a publisher mistake.
Or twins.
Say that?
Or twins.
Or twins, there you go. Margaret, I love that one. Junior. We're getting near the end of the Age of Innocence. And every once in a while he would do like four or five to a page and just do kind of sketches of them, put them in. There's the other one of June Delight. That looks like a full portrait. I'd never seen, until I looked in the book again, I'd never seen that little sketch of Louise over there. I think that might be the right, the last one for the book. A lot of people know this quote. I learned to cross the threshold of my studio with reverence, as though I were entering a shrine, and a part for me to become a co-creator with the universal thinker of all things. And so having that reverence to go into a room and know that you were guided completely by the Creator in everything that you did. But how do you do that? And how do you teach that balance to children? We're going to look at that in just a moment. Now, at the last minute, I chose to put this photo in here, which shows him with his first wife and one of his daughters. But the reason I did that was there were so many portraits of the children in the background. This is his Chicago studio that he had for a short time. We know most of the time he was at Carnegie Hall, but this was his Chicago studio. And I love this photo. It's just one of the most amazing ones that actually shows a lot of the child portraits that we have never seen and never found yet. You know, how could we get photographs close up of those? I think it would be another Christmas day. Sam Spiker might recognize these two portraits at the bottom there. These are at his house. This is from his collection. We don't know who these children are, but that was another Christmas day when Michael Hudak, who was a former president of the university, was called up. And these women in New York said that they had these two portraits. And Sam or Michael Hudak were able to purchase them. So we have these two originals. They're not here at the museum, but they're in the Sam Spiker collection. And we're so lucky just to have access to them. Wonderful if you want to go see them. These are full portraits. These are not, some of them were used for the book, some of them were not. These were from the photos, 6,500 photos that I have of Swannanoa that I went through to be able to create the Swannanoa book. Had to clean up quite a few of them just to make them presentable. These bottom ones are not in oval frames, but are rectangular framed, and I believe are in the university collection. Drawing of the young Christ, and then the full portrait of Christ, which was at Swannanoa for many, 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 many years, you know, until it got stored. Now, we should have that somewhere in the museum. But I think this is interesting because it really was how he worked, you know. So, here's the Youth of Character Rally. This is a page in the Swannanoa book. This is when Lao Russell came along. You know, one of the things about children, you know, I've been able to share with you how he loved his children and how he perceived children and the imagination that they held, and how do we mold them, into wonderful people with character? Two things that I think are important to bring forward here about Lao when they got married. So, two things. One was, only requirement she asked of Walter when they got married was that they live in the country. And to me, this is so important because they both had experienced nature as a child and how important it was to link you up with the Creator. So this is part of the issues that we have in too many children in the cities. They don't know what nature is. And so wouldn't it be harder for them to connect with the Creator if they're not exposed a lot to nature? And so this is part of the reasons that the public schools may not work. They might work better when they're out in the country. But I do believe that, that was one of the things that I think Walter and Lao had in common, is that they had both studied the Tao Te Ching. And one of the attributes of the Tao is that it is based on nature. Walter talks about that throughout his work and how important that is. And going into the silence, how do we teach that if we don't do it? Do you take time every morning? I don't feel balanced unless I take time with the Creator every morning to meditate. And how can we teach that to our children if we're not doing it? And so how do we teach character? How do we teach? The best way to teach is to be it, like Richard said last night. And that's what children are going to watch. They're going to watch you like a hawk. They're going to watch your every word. They're going to watch what you do. And this is how they learn. And this is how they learn best. And so how do we bring that into the schools? So the other thing that I think was a great sadness with Walter Russell was that, as I shared with you, the poetry, really, he writes like poetry when he writes these children's books, and he writes about children. It is like pure poetry. And so as we learn spiritually and grow, you ever feel like you get tested? To be able to evolve and go forward? I think it was one of the greatest tests of Walter's life, that he was going to lose his children, the love of his children, when he went to the love of his life, Lao Russell, who was Daisy Cook. And I think that was one of the hardest things, but he had dreamed about the woman in blue. And it's not written about. To me, it's behind the words and behind the pages. But I think it was a great sadness with him that basically his two girls took the side of, his ex-wife. And I think he lost that true connection with them. And I think that was a sacrifice he had to make to be with the woman he had waited for all of his life, to do the work that he was meant to do at Swannanoa. And so even that first winter, I think I found it and I put it in my Swannanoa book. First cold winter at Swannanoa in 1948, he says the agony of it all. Now, why would he write like that? Because they were freezing. They had 4 tractor-trailer trucks of art that came down from Carnegie Hall. But how do you take a marble palace that has a lot of marble inside of it and turn it into a museum and turn it into your home and a place that has fiery warmth? And they use I know they used the Baronia Hall fireplace a lot. It was going when I first met Lao Russell in February of 1985. And how do you do that? But they both felt tested. That soon after they got married in July. And they moved into Swannanoa. They were both tested, working 20 hours a day, trying to bring the work and the message forward. They wanted to open in April, but they did not open until May of 1949. And so basically, how do you take that and eventually grow into an Age of Character club that has this many people, like hundreds of people in the gardens at Swannanoa? How do you build that? Lao Russell did it because she knew the power of the Creator and working with the Creator. And so basically, I think this was just a really important day when they had that Age of Character. But she built that up. You know, I had photos of children in her bedroom who she would just, come up, let them come upstairs and talk to them. She had an amazing connection with children. How do we create the great minds of the world? What did Walter Russell do? And this is a little misprint I noticed because it talks about the Society of Arts and Sciences. I think this is a little not quite true. It says the person who found the Society of Arts and Sciences was Herbert Spencer in the late 1800s. That was a Twilight Club. That wasn't the Society of Arts and Sciences. The Twilight Club became the Society of Arts and Sciences. And I think this is really distinct because these were what they considered the great minds of the world coming together and sharing their arts and sciences. And so basically, by the time the Society of Arts and Sciences came into fruition, which I believe was after World War I or World War II, one or the other. I'm looking at Richard on that. But basically, then they had women. I don't believe the Twilight Club started with women. But the Society of Arts and Sciences did. There were many women involved with the Society of Arts and Sciences. And so in this book, I want to share some of these books. The World Crisis, which is so applicable today. This is one of the major books, definitely marked, earmarked. I've been through this book I don't know how many times, but we're still dealing with the challenges of today's society. And this is where they talk about it. And they talk about the education system. And it's kind of near the end of the book. The era of educational systems is it assuming that brains are mind. Brains are purely physical organs which have the ability to electrically record sensations and events for the purpose of broadcasting them when they are needed. And so we get into what educational systems need to do, and that what we have even today does not meet the true definition in the dictionary of how educational systems today in all the different schools that we have. And so one of the other things that was very similar to Teddy Roosevelt was that he was homeschooled. Well, Walter Russell, as many of you know, quit school at the age of 9 and became a cash boy, and he needed to help to create a livelihood for his family. He says the best thing that ever happened to him. And Lao Russell shares in this book, The World Crisis, how all the great minds probably were homeschooled or basically learned on their own. And she actually mentions where they were. I hope I didn't hit that too far. Right below here. Only because of this inner conviction in those of our geniuses who have survived the inquisition of misunderstanding by conformist teachers do we have such geniuses as Edison, Marconi, Tesla, and others like them who were either compelled by their teachers to leave school or left themselves. That's a huge statement, you know. So how do we change that? This book talks about it. It talks about how we change our educational systems. It's going to be so different than it is now. Gabor Mate, the doctor from Canada, says that our schools and our society are so toxic right now. You know, reading, writing, and arithmetic was kind of like how it all started, but it was by rote. It was by memorization as opposed to being able to use our minds, not our brains. So I'd like to leave you all with this. Now, this is a compilation of what I believe are the beliefs, the values, and the character of the Russells. And this is basically broken down into how they set an example for other people. This is what they came to. It's such a broad scope. You almost have to read every book they have, which I think I have, to be able to come up with this. What were their beliefs? Well, you got to come up with what their beliefs were to change the educational system of the children for the future. You got to be able to set that example, you know, even if you're homeschooling them for a while. Because there are many of us that have envisioned a Russell school or a wisdom school, something for people from age 5 to 95. You know, one of the other statistics I just ran across was that 4 out of 10 children have not completed secondary school. How is that possible in our world? You know, maybe that was a good thing, but how do we teach them? How do we give them something different? Something that Walter Russell automatically kind of fell into, you know. The other challenge that he had with Teddy was that Teddy had severe asthma as a child. Many of us know that Walter Russell, he didn't just have a near-death experience, he died and came back at 14. And so that was a similarity that they went through that I think would have helped them, you know, share the experiences of which they had. They were both homeschooled. I believed, even though Teddy Roosevelt proposed a lot of, you know, he just wasn't going to sit back if war was there or if war was incited. He said that he admired his father, one of the most important people he ever admired. And this was because his father not only had the attributes of the male, of courage and being able to be strong and have strength, but he was also one of the most sensitive men he ever knew. That he was gentle, that he had these attributes. And I think that's why Walter Russell was so close to Teddy's children, because he admired the way that Teddy was bringing them up. And Teddy was bringing them up because he admired his father and his mother. And so I think there were so many similarities there. And I think this is why he dedicated his 3rd children's books to the children of Teddy Roosevelt. And so as we move forward into this new age, into a new beginning, a renaissance of what Rob was talking about last night, there's no accident that you're here. There's no accident of whoever's listening in virtual. And so I really, really feel that there are many reasons why we gathered. And where 2 or more are gathered, this is where we share. This is where we lift each other up. This is where we say, okay, you know, there's a mirror here with you somewhere. And do we do that with our children? And I believe that this was a compilation of what the Russells believed in. And the first thing was communing. Not praying, but communing with God before you ever created anything, whether it was a book, a painting, whether you maybe even worked in your lab with a scientific, you know, something that you were trying to discover. Also with Lao Russell, she stressed the inherent goodness of all people. And she stresses that again and again in many of her books. You know, and that is a little contrary to the original Christian upbringing that we've all had, that were born in sin. And I believe that that was something that she was speaking the truth of what she believed. It's something I believe. And I really resonated with that. It's kind of like a law. It's kind of like a spiritual law. And so basically, if we believe in the inherent goodness of all people, we teach that to our children. How can you go to a Christian church? I formally left the Christian church because I didn't believe that we're born in sin. That was the first thing. It did not resonate with me. I said, this cannot be true. And so basically, do we act on that? My family wasn't real happy, but I was happy. You know, because as you go up the ladder of spirituality, we're tested again and again and again about being true to yourself. And to be able to teach this to our children, we have to live it. And so knowledge versus the senses. This is again and again repeated in all of their books. Information versus memorization. A couple of quotes there that we think and know rather than to remember and repeat. This is basic with learning with children. It's basic with our learning, you know. And so if you learn that late in life, you kind of have to unlearn a lot, you know. You're like, oh, I have to let go of that because that's what my parents believe, but I don't believe that's true anymore. And that's a test, you know, and it's a test to speak your truth, especially with your family, for sure. And then to set that example for children. The genius inherent in everyone. And even Christ said, what I do, you can do also. And so being able to believe that is entirely possible, that we can set that example and know that the Christ consciousness can come alive within ourselves, and that we show that to our children. And so the creation principle, the experience, Richard last night talked about the 5 laws of success: humility, reverence, inspiration, deep purpose, and joy. And this is in The Man Who Tapped. And so, you know, this was one of the first books that I was ever exposed to. And I urge everyone, if you haven't read this book, oh my gosh, it's a must. Little book. Read it, you know. Lao Russell read it in 2 days. I was like, well, it took me about a day, you know. But she probably took her time with it a little bit more. And this was how she learned and met Walter Russell, 1946. Reading this little book, one of her friends put it in her hands, and she said, oh my goodness, I have to talk to this man. And she did what no woman in that day and time ever did. She picked up the phone and she said, I need to meet you. And he said, oh, well, I'm going to be in Boston. He was in New York City. She was in Boston. Within 2 weeks, they had met after she read this book. Pretty quick manifestation, if I don't say so myself. This book was written, A Worthy Messenger, came out in 2011 by Charles Hardy, who lives in Boston. He's a friend of mine. Amazing book. The amount of research he did with the New York Times is just absolutely astonishing. And so I had to read this quite a bit to be able to footnote it in my Swannanoa book. And so there will be 3 biographies eventually of Walter Russell when my book comes out. This is one of my favorite little, what are they called? Little booklet. And the reason I love this one so much is it almost sounds like it's a question asked by a child. Don't you think it is time that the human race grew up? But I love it also because in this there are details about Walter Russell when he died and came back. And I mean details that came from the home study course. And so I really urge you to look at all of the little booklets that they have out there. This is such a really, really important one because it recounts his own story and why he felt like he came back. Very important. Cause and effect, the balance and importance of nature in all things, rhythmic balanced interchange in all relations. How do we have rhythmic balanced interchange with other people if we don't have it with ourselves? How do we reflect that back in our daily living? How do we wake up each day and commune with God and look at the priorities of our day and are guided throughout our day to live the philosophy that the Russells were able to live? And I'm not saying they were perfect. Now, there's a few things, you know. However, they strove to live the philosophy every day of their lives. And it was really wonderful to meet Lao Russell because you couldn't meet her and imagine ever small talking. You were never going to talk about the weather. There is no way. You walk into the baronial hall of the palace, and you were going to meet an astounding, astonishing, dynamic, vibrant woman who talked about life. And this is what impacted me, because I studied many, many spiritualities before I met Lao Russell. But this was something that caught me. And I felt like, you know, one of the really different things about the Russell message is that, and this is going to be one of the most challenging things, because, you know, what do you have in the public schools? A separation of church and state. Here comes along Walter Russell and says, you can't separate yourself from God. Everything you can create comes from God. And so basically, he's saying a whole new thing. How do we bring God into a school that we're going to need to create if it's after, you know, following the Russell philosophy? But we first have to live it, and then we need to attract the teachers. And so Walter Russell and children are two of my favorite topics in the whole world. And so to be able to bring this to you today has just really, really been an honor. I just want to go over the last of these. Love ye one another, which was on the Christ statue up at Swannanoa. They were teaching the golden rule. And I read others. There are many other men in the Twilight Club that actually wrote their own code of ethics and also believed in the golden rule. And how they worded it partly was the hurt of any man is the hurt of every man. Blessings extended to any man. Bless all men, all people. And so basically, this is what we do when we look at each other and we share our beliefs in how we're going to act and how we're going to be kind to each other, because it's going to come right back if we don't. You know, and that's the beauty of karma. It works by itself, you know, it's a law. Character clubs, I can't say enough about this, but I don't have to because Elaine's going to do it tomorrow. Yay, Elaine. And so I think this is really important, you know, because it's another thing. You know, the schools today don't talk about God and starting with God and how we're going to create through God. They also don't talk about character. You might have it in the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and some of these other clubs, which actually many of us believe came out of the Twilight Club and the Society of Arts and Sciences, the Ruritan, the Rotary, all of that, if you've studied some of the history. But basically, character, how do we bring the character clubs into the schools? Well, this woman right here figured it out. She's going to share that with us tomorrow. And I think it's a miracle, because being able to live the philosophy and then share it into and bring it into education is just a miracle of how to shift it all. How to shift it all and see that our children are going to start recognizing how their friends behave, how their friends act. And if they can see the difference in right and wrong that much earlier, they're going to develop their character to be able to be men and women that add to our culture and add to the positiveness of the world. Man-woman equalization leagues. You know, to me, this was just something that I think Lao Russell was destined to do, because when she met Walter Russell, she could see when he spoke in public that there was something not quite equal, not quite right there. And he had to let go of a lot of his ego to be able to move forward, to be able to be balanced in what he was speaking and showing to the world. And in 1908, he had to declare bankruptcy. Well, he said, I never had to worry about money before because he had always created through God. But whatever happened in that period of time, how did he get brought back? He had support. Thomas Watson, through IBM, helped to bring him back. back into a livelihood of abundance. And so this is really important. You know, he learned a lot through that process, I'm sure. You know, and he was brought to Watson to be able to educate and share his ethics through business. And so he was still bringing his own message forward. But with Lao Russell, he had to balance out and let go of more of his ego to become more balanced. So I believe by the time that they met, and then it was just destined for them to be together, which I think is one of the greatest love stories ever told. Ever told. And, you know, I'd love to, one of my other aspirations is to create a history through a screenplay. I think their love story is one of the greatest ever told, and to bring the spiritual character of themselves through, you know, it's an amazing, awesome medium film. And so that is something that I imagine, hopefully. If I don't do it, maybe someone else will be inspired to do it. So the equality of men and women, she espoused to that after they met. I think she showed him many things. I think he showed her many things. He knew that she was his equal in every way. She knew all the science. She appreciated beauty. You know, I don't think they had to say a lot to each other. I think all they had to do was look at each other. I really do. I think they knew what each other thought. And so I think we're coming into a world where children can innately know, and they can show us many, many things. I have a cousin, I think this is an amazing story. I have a cousin who was brought to his own spirituality because his children at 4 and 5 started talking about their other lifetimes. And he was brought into spirituality because his children showed him that there was expansiveness and another belief system that he hadn't even thought about. And so there are so many things that children can teach us if we are open to that, because they have the genius within them. And so if we believe that the genius exists in all of us, we can move forward to a greater future. We can teach our children better and trust that they know, as long as they haven't been indoctrinated, you know. It's really trusting that we all know and that they know. And so I always try to ask a lot of questions of children, because I think they can teach me and tell me a thing or two. And so I really believe that the greatest way that we can bring children into the future is to live the philosophy, be the philosophy, as Richard says, and basically bring forward all of these teachings, share them, and see where that will lead, hopefully to some kind of different way of learning and teaching our children for the future.
Hello, everybody. This is John Bonsall, President, University of Science and Philosophy. I want to thank you for participating in our wonderful 2022 homecoming, moving into the future, living a life triumphant. So if you would like to reach out to us, we would love for you to visit our website at philosophy.org, and anything that you could do to help us promote this message throughout the world would be greatly appreciated. And thank you.